And welcome to Tech Load. Sandra Spencer here, lined up for you for the next hour. Tech headlines, news, info, music and insights on the legal world of digital assets, digital management and digital value creation. How many digital accounts do you own? How many accounts have you logged onto today? Email, mobile phone, Google, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. The list can be endless, and so are my questions. Are you moving goods and services online? Do you make money online with digital channels? Are you a YouTuber, Instagrammer, multi-level marketer, domain owner? How many photos and videos are your property? Ones you haven't posted away to social media and the public domain. Do you really know just how many online accounts you have? And how many passwords? Cryptocurrency holder, medical records, I'm getting exhausted. Online banking, you just may have more digital assets than you can easily account for. Digital assets for some companies and individuals are far exceeding the value of any other asset class. Do you have more digital assets than physical assets? Can you put a value to your digital assets? How can you or others on your behalf manage those digital assets? If you can't manage those digital affairs yourself due to illness, accident, cognitive decline, impairment, and the aging process, what happens to your digital assets when you die? Do you care? Coming up, there'll be a song just for you. Don't worry, be happy. And also coming up, we'll have a digital assets legal specialist who knows all about digital management and why it's important for you in an ever-increasing digital ecosystem. That's it. Don't worry, be happy. You're with Southern FM and you're tuned into Tech Load. We're taking a close look at the legal world of digital assets, digital management and digital value creation. In the studio is Michael Perkins, a multimedia and digital media pioneer. Warm welcome to Michael. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Sandra. Thank you for having me.
So, you have a background in technology, law, and families. What should we be worried about and or happy about? Here are 5 quick questions. What excites you about tech?
It's always been a challenge, and we got started in tech in my law firm in the late 80s with an Apple II that managed our administrative databases. So we've been having a tech-influenced life for all of my professional life.
And what surprises you about tech?
That it's a never-ending source of challenge, and we've surfed the waves since the late 80s of can a computer replace a typewriter?
Are you a good surfer?
Yes. To email, to the internet, to where we are today. So
how do you surf those waves?
By being always open to change, and something my father told me, because we started the family law firm again in 1985. And in 1985, he was the same age I am now, 64. And he said to me, yes, he found that he had run out of steam in his mid-50s and he had to reinvent himself every 5 years. And
this is prima donna.
Absolutely. And he wondered whether I was going to have the same experience. Looking back on the last 30 years, it's an absolute resounding yes.
Yeah, so there's a Madonna in you.
There has to be.
And what concerns you about tech?
The intrusiveness. We've gone from tech being a jumped-up clerical system into something that now is a far more intimate influence in our life. And
intimate, like we really do know some of this technology intimately.
And the technology knows us intimately, and I really get concerned about how conscious people are when they bring tech deeply into their lives, and that's something I'm sure we'll unpack as this discussion goes on.
Yeah, we were talking earlier when you mentioned the film where somebody falls in love with an AI assistant.
That's right, and we already have coming out of Japan robots to provide social support for people in aged care, and for those that have got social problems about connecting to people and needing. So we don't have care dogs alone. We've now got care robots.
And how do you keep up with the changes?
Barely.
You're just barely coping.
I think the biggest concern now is just the rate of acceleration, and people's ability to keep up is getting challenged every day.
AI, ethics, data, these are the hottest topics. What are your thoughts?
First, off the top of my head, be very, very careful. Because
that's not just because you're a lawyer.
No. I don't know how many people out there that are financial planners, but it's a good case in point. The government, on the back of the Hayne Royal Commission, said to all the financial planners, right, you're now going to become a new profession. So there were changes to the law, and now financial planners have a code of conduct and a code of ethics, and which says you must obey the law and you must get the informed consent of your client to everything that you say. The banks or the financial institutions come up and say, oh no, we're going to use robo-advice. We're going to put computer systems in front of people. The computer systems will make sure...
So are they saying that this will replace the human advice?
To an extent. Okay, how does a computer understand informed consent? If the computer's going to be delivering financial advice...
Well, they'll need to go on a training program, and there'll need to be regulations, and they'll have to obey the law.
But can you tell me how you can make an ethical algorithm? Can you tell me how a computer can assess the cognitive ability of someone to understand a contract and engage? I think we are in the era of the technology-augmented professional, but how our data gets used to modify systems and behaviour. You go to a car dealer and you apply for a finance for that new car. There's a very high chance that the whole credit application will be run by a computer algorithm, not a person.
That's right. And those algorithms, the beginnings were written by humans, but then sometimes the AI is then creating its own information, its own algorithms.
And that's where this deep learning, machine learning, the bias in machine learning. So we go, right, okay, what's the mechanics of ethics? The mechanics of ethics is really simple. Ethics is acting right in the first place, yes, but what contributes to acting right in the first place? It's three things: values, principles, and purpose. Okay, so when you're writing a computer program, what values and principles are going to drive the behaviour of the system? Now, that for what purpose is the system exist? If it's only going to exist for and you can write something for good or for bad. So this question of ethics permeates everything from design, management, delivery, use.
And that could affect every area of our lives.
That's right.
Potentially. So
as people go into JB Hi-Fi and they go and pick up one of those Alexa home hubs, are they thinking, I'm going to have some fun at home with this piece of tech? Or I'm actually allowing Google to bug my home, create a data feed that it's going to own, and from which they can form about judgments about me?
That seems crazy.
But that's the offer that's out in JB Hi-Fi. But is anyone actually telling you that's what Google's up to? That's the question.
That is an ethical question.
And it's also, but it also then says, well, okay, we're going to have this really intimate relationship with Google. It's no longer in the cloud. It's in your home. It's making judgments about you.
That's more useful than Siri, potentially.
So how much privacy are you prepared to give up for the help it's giving you? That's an interesting transaction, but it's not something that's being talked about very much.
No. So what do you think the pathway would be for greater understanding and greater control over what is already coming into play?
Well, there are some very big public policy issues in this. Government wants to reduce the cost of labour in government services. Government is embracing technology and how it deals with us as citizens. I think this stuff's got to be worked through top down. I think we've got to to work out how is government going to affect our lives using AI, and then use those principles to inform how businesses and commerce acts with us. There's no doubt people need AI to make the most of human labour in what we do and how we function as a society. But we're going to have to rethink this idea of sovereignty and how much control do we really have over the data that we generate and affects us. It's a new social contract, and we're evolving as a society as a result.
And you've been specialising in digital assets and management for over 30 years. What is still fascinating you about this area, this ecosystem?
Just how fast it's globalising and the connections that it enables as a society. When I look at my kids, they know themselves as Australians, but the world has become this very flat landscape for them, and they have no sense of being limited to a particular time or place in how they interact with people and the things that they can achieve. So I think...
And is that something you're worried about, or is that something that you're fascinated? Do you think this could be a negative or a positive? Well,
it goes back to one of the I think life lessons. People kill people. Guns don't kill people. So the thing is that tech isn't bad. It's what we do with it. I think that there is an enormous capacity for good in the digital life that we now have. What worries me is how are we evolving as a society to make sure that we use it in a positive and constructive way. There's plenty of dark side to tech. From my point of view, I think that I prefer to concentrate on how do we educate people, families, communities to make the most of tech to be the most constructive contributor to their lives that it can be.
That's right. And it might just be that we will need a revolution. So we'll be taking a short break. Southern FM, and you're tuned into Tech Load, and we're taking a close look at the legal world of digital assets, digital management and digital value creation with Michael Perkins, a multimedia and digital media pioneer. Now, Michael, how and why did you get into specialising in digital assets and management?
Well, it started with us starting the family law firm, and my father and his partner Ken Hooton turning around and saying, right, this is 1985, so we're going to start the firm with Kalamazoo accounting and exercise books and typewriters, but we will buy a computer at the first opportunity that you can justify it.
They must have been expensive back then.
They were. It was about, this is 1985, so it was a $3,000 exercise, which was the equivalent of a expensive electronic typewriter. And we're just seeing memory typewriters come in at the mainstream in the 80s. So we started, and then in 1986, that's when we got the Apple II and AppleWorks to run a database for safe custody packets and archiving. So we had to get our minds around professional practice and digital assets from the get-go, and we were one of the first law firms in Australia to have a network of Macintosh computers. So that was in the early days of the 128K.
I was wondering, you're all set up. You could have just gone on to an IT track there.
Well, that was one of the choices, but it was a family law firm, so I became the commercial and technology law specialist. My wife had a posting to New York in 1987, and so I got an education in New York on multimedia and technology law practice when it was really at the early stages.
And America was always and is still ahead.
It was. So I cut my teeth on multimedia and technology law in the late 80s, and my father died in unexpectedly in the early 90s. So that's when I took over his private client practice. And so I ended up in this really interesting world where we were dealing with commercial, family, technology and wealth. And that certainly has been our focus.
Yeah. From a legal point of view, how is it best to define a digital asset, and what are some different types of digital assets that, some of us may not be aware of?
Okay, well, look, I think the first thing to think about is, and going back to your AI question, fundamentally, digital assets is all about data, but data in and of itself is not property and it's not an asset. So we live in a world of data in one form or another. How we think about what is an asset is a function of what we recognise as significant and what do we control. So at the very least, you start to think of, so that stuff I put on a folder on a server, I'm starting to control that and classify it. So that starts to look like an asset. If you look at the online accounts, LinkedIn, Yahoo, that's a contractual relationship that it gives you access to a service that is hosted on an external computer. So it's something you value, you store stuff of value in there, so it's starting to look like an asset. The issue really is, what is significant? And I think a way to think about this is saying, digital assets really come into three main categories. One is your digital devices, because that's what controls access to the online stuff. The second is, what do you store online? And that's the information that is generated for you, by you, or about you. And then the third is this question of digital services. What are what's the other things that get overlaid on that? And that can be range from how people use your data, like in online processing of information that you get, online decisions like credit support decisions when you apply for finance, but it's also getting very personal, because these home hubs and home technology brings right back into your lounge room. Here's a sea of data that's being built up around you. And yet, are you giving it away to Google? Are you giving it away to Amazon?
Yeah, so, what is ethical ownership and control of digital assets?
Well, it really comes back to this question of citizenship. You need to stand up and be counted. What we can say is that just plugging in Alexa into your house, letting Google into your home, you're giving away all your generated data to Google. Do you really care? Now, for the people that don't care...
But there's an exchange there, isn't there? There's a product that gives a service.
That's right. So if you don't care about your data and all you want to is access the service, go for it. But if Google starts using this to start to track behaviour of people in homes and generating insights into how they can market more effectively to you, and so what comes back through Alexa is media influence and influencing your behaviour as you age, as you get less able to make proactive decisions.
So inevitably there's bias that's built in with some of the algorithms.
There can be. And so how much influence this is going to wield in our lives, we don't know. So just like people talk...
So do we do without Alexa? Do we do without these services that could actually enhance and better the quality of people's lives?
That's a choice that we have. But I do think that it comes back to two very simple concepts about empowerment and safety. Now, Google empowers us to do a whole range of stuff. That's fantastic. But how much can these things impinge on our safety in terms of privacy, control, scamming? It's a balance that we have to evolve. So I think that what we need to be aware of is that we are evolving as a society into this digitally enabled world. So just like we promote...
And we'd like to stay enabled ourselves.
Absolutely. So everyone's on a learning curve. So I think people have to make a decision about, are they prepared to get on this this learning curve and what do I need to learn about? So we're just hitting some high points this evening about becoming not only active agers, but actively involved in our digital life. And
there are ways where you can balance, having products and services, but not having all your private data being used or misused.
That's exactly right. So you need to be conscious about where is this stuff sourced, where is it stored, who else has access to it, how much autonomy are you giving up when you sign up to these online services. And the one thing that you can guarantee is that every free service you might sign up to has got some kind of value exchange in the back end for the service provider. So whether the value exchange is explicit in terms of money or implicit because you're renting your data to someone else to make some money out of, that should be a conscious decision. And I think that people need to be smarter about how deeply they let technology get embedded in their life. But that said, if there's a critical service, and Sophie Hub, which is a company that's based down here in Melbourne, is a really good example. Local technology about creating a safer home using sensors around the home. They build a picture of how this ageing person is ageing in place at home. But all that data that is being generated about the behaviour of that ageing person, where's it going? How's it being stored? How much control should the family have around it? Who's going to have access to it?
Actually, I know someone whose mother was suffering from dementia, and there were cameras and everything set up, and I think he could pretty much watch her and see what she was doing, and how ethical is that? Well,
as long as you've got your eyes wide open and you understand what you're bringing into the home, the advantage can be enormous. And so
that could save his mother's life.
Absolutely. So we're not saying don't use technology. What we're saying is have your eyes wide open and make sure that as you bring technology into your life, there's a value exchange in there that you're comfortable with. Because Sophie Hub can create an incredibly valuable service for a family to allow people to stay at home longer. So full marks to them for doing that.
Yeah, and that's not the only company. I know there are a lot of companies globally that also have been working on the same products and have released similar products. So how is Australia going in getting regulations and a legal hold on digital assets?
Slowly, but so is the rest of the world. The US and UK and Canada are probably the three leading jurisdictions at the moment. New South Wales has got a proposal around digital asset access and allowing people with powers of attorney and other fiduciaries to access digital assets. So it's clearly something that the government is conscious of. But at the moment, access to your digital life, if you're disabled or dead, is problematic. And it depends on the terms of the contract and the service provision. So the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, who I'm a member of and operates worldwide in over 60 legal jurisdictions, has published some guidance which is all about and is focused on the importance of understanding the contracts to which you're subject and an inventory of what you think is significant. And I think those are the two practical steps where you need to start. And so a good way of thinking about this is that, okay, you're in a car accident, you're unconscious, you're in emergency. Where does your attorney start in terms of taking responsibility for you and your life? What is significant? How do they pay the bills? How do they get access to your money? Where's the record about your health insurance? So increasingly, this is all online. So, okay, how do we leave the levers to our online life to enable our representatives to help us? That's ground zero, and that's where most people are at the moment.
So do you see more regulations coming into play with the digital asset landscape?
Yes. What we are seeing is more regulation around access. privacy, confidential information, restraints of trade in terms of how people use information as they move across jobs. That's all being regulated largely by contract. Copyright law is keeping up reasonably well, but it's probably the Achilles heel of all of this at the moment is big data, AI, machine learning, and who owns an algorithm. And so,
well, there's even things to suggest, can the robots or the AI own what they create? What do you think as a lawyer?
Well, I think that is a step too far. But what I
agree.
But what I do see coming out of the courts at the moment are a number of decisions which do support that. Just because a decision is made by an algorithm doesn't mean that the person that created it doesn't have any responsibility for that outcome. So there is a causal link between who creates the algorithm and what it does in the world. And that causal link of responsibility, I think...
So you can always link it back to a human or some human group.
Though there are a number of people that have tried to run the argument the other way, and the courts have said no. It's like, oh no, I didn't do it, the computer did it.
So dealing with your digital life for the individual, what are some key areas to consider? So if you look at digital footprint, the right to digitally die, wills and inheritance, accident, illness, this is such a big area, cognitive decline and ageing, which you've already touched on in our discussion so far. But, what are some key things to look at? You've already mentioned some, but how would you summarise it?
First, foremost, and the biggest issue is you've got to decide what is significant. When we had the encryption debate in the 1990s, the cry went up, don't put locks on garbage cans. And we need to apply that thinking to our digital life. You only need to control the stuff that can really either enhance or damage you. So you need to identify what are the
and that makes things quite simple to refer back to just a key line there.
That's exactly right. So that's why inventories are important, because that is your opportunity to make that decision about what is significant.
And I've never really thought about it, but even when I was trying to think about all the things I do online and what's connected with my life, I only touched on it in the intro. So there's so much that would affect my life that I would need an inventory to really be able to work it out.
That's exactly right. So if you think about it, okay, if you go and talk to a lawyer about estate planning, and someone will talk to you about powers of attorney and wills and trusts and creating representatives and all sorts of things. But you also need to think, well, as you create these representatives, clairvoyance is in no one's job description. So
not yet.
No.
We might leave that to the AI.
Right. But so how do you inform and arm your representatives with enough information to do their job? The right to digitally die is really a discussion about the right to be forgotten. This has come into the law in Europe with the GDPR, the data protection regulations, and it's probably our biggest social issue. People have been accumulating information about us for so long, especially at a government level. How do we link all of this together so that we can be forgotten? Because there's no doubt that a very big government and commercial value is in being able to predict people's behaviour and influence people's behaviour. So the record of how we have behaved has enormous value to both commerce, government, and the functioning of society.
Is that for the betterment of society, perhaps? Yes and no?
We could be here for the rest of the night talking about that. But I think what we need to be conscious of is that this is a very big problem. What is the extent of our right to be forgotten? Wills and inheritance, don't forget that an executor in your will can only be responsible for what they can come into their possession. So if you don't control your digital assets with enough precision so you can hand control over, the only thing that you are guaranteeing is that those things will fall by the wayside, will not be commercialised, will not be
misused,
accessed.
could be open to fraud, potentially.
But equally, if you're a digital musician, and I had a aging rocker who died, and in over 40 years in the music industry and as a mainstream writer, composer, not only and performer, no one had ever done an inventory of everything that he'd produced, but it was all subject to copyright. Now, copyright lasts for 70 years after he died. He died in...
That's 70 years after the person dies?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
It's
That's
a long-term income stream.
Mm.
So he died broke, but he had all the copyright. So the
family members don't want that person to digitally die.
No way. So our job in building up his probate inventory, we did the first authoritative inventory of his works in his performing life. But that created an inventory for a licensing business that brought the estate back from bankruptcy to profit. Other good examples of performers that have died close to broke and then created multi-million-dollar industries are Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson. So it's a good lesson to keep in mind that if you are in the business of creating transactable assets that have a digital form, putting an effort into an inventory is what's going to allow that economic value to endure.
That's right. We're going to go to a break and we're going to have a look at digital love. Southern FM, and you're listening to Tech Load with Michael Perkins. We're looking at, well, we're coming to the end, but we're looking at digital assets and digital management for ethics and for good balance in our society moving forward. So if we look at businesses, Michael, what are some tips you could give businesses on how they could manage digital assets?
Okay, the first thing is to remember that businesses need to be separated from the personal lives of the operators or owners of the business. So we've got to look at the business in its own context. And if you...
because there are shareholders and stakeholders.
Well, they can be shareholders, stakeholders. So you've got to think of your business as a separate box. So in relation to that, you've got to think, well, right, there's three things that you've got to think about: operations, management, and equity. Operations is about how does information optimize the operations of my business. So how I'm smart about using things like online cloud services. There can be a dramatic dependency between the business and online services. So if you're doing a startup business, it's surprising the number of people that forget to put the licenses for things like Office 365 and Xero in the name of the company rather than the individuals. So
what about domain names? I mean,
domain names, trademarks, business names, absolutely. So so ground zero is just like we're saying for the private individual, be aware what you own or control. The same has got to be said for the business owners. That's a management responsibility. But then when you come to think about, okay, if I want to sell the business, if I want to finance the business, how do I evidence the value of my business? And how do I evidence what is the going concern elements of my business? Well, if you look at the history of listed companies since about 1950, we now have, and you look at the value of physical assets versus the book value of the company. In the 1950s, physical asset value was probably about 60% of the value of the company. Mm-hmm. Now it's down to about 10% of 20% of the absolute outside.
That's a big difference.
That's the rise in the value of intangible assets. So we're not talking about... So digital assets are just one type of intangible assets. And so we need to think, okay, how does the business... And this is the ownership and management question. How much does the business rely on information to earn money? How do you document that? So your social media programs, your publishing programs, your document templates that you use to standardize systems and processes.
So what you're talking us through is this is a way of evaluating what the digital assets mean for a company and managing them. And
the first thing that you've got to understand is how much of your business depends on the availability of information or digital assets.
And that's also important, like, for succession if you need, to hand over a company.
That's right. Or sale. So, okay, if I want a liquidity event, if I want to sell my company and not pay GST, I've got to hand over. I've got to sell it as a going concern. So the management and shareholder problem is, okay, how do I evidence the intangible and information assets that drive the operation of my business? Because it's a tax issue, it's a valuation issue, and if we don't get smart about identifying the information assets on which the operations of our business depends, we're shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to valuation. And I remember a conversation I had with a Commonwealth Treasurer at the time, and we were discussing this, and he said, "But Michael, don't we have goodwill in the accounting standards?" And I said, "Yeah, but mate, goodwill's broken. It's a completely undifferentiated asset class. It doesn't contribute to an understanding of how the business operates." And it was just this blank look on his face.
And do you think it's been like this for a long time in your experience?
Yes. In around 2005, the accounting standards around intangible assets started to change. But the accounting profession really hasn't progressed how the implementation of that knowledge should occur. So we're not being well served by the accounting profession at the moment, and that's having an impact elsewhere in how we value businesses.
It has a knock-on effect, so you might see that changing in the future. How great is the digital divide today? Digital haves and digital have-nots. Do you see digital bridges or a deeper divide?
Unless we get the community education piece right, the digital divide is only going to get deeper. And
so we've all got a lot of work to do in all areas of society.
We have to build a culture about learning. We've got to be prepared to embrace this and learn, but we also need to be getting good education in the first place.
Yep. Tech history on this day. The CDC 1604 was released. You've already talked us back in the past of computers and IT. So this was October the 16th, 1959. It was the CDC 1604 computer, the world's fastest computer at that time, and it was called the father of the supercomputer.
That's right, and it took another 30 years before we got computing power of that level down into the community. And I remember it was the Mac 2. It was about 1988 when Apple put it out, and it was described to me as putting an old-fashioned supercomputer in the hands of Mr. and Mrs. Average.
There you go.